Chickatumi, Quebec, Canada, September 9th, 1955. At this place and on this day, a man by the name of Michael John Kricfalusi is born to his parents Michael and Mary Lou Kricfalusi. While there's not much documentation for John's early days, we do know that later in his early childhood, he spent much of his life in Germany and Belgium while his father was serving in the Royal Canadian Air Force. With his father now serving and his family living in Europe, John now learns of the Saturday morning screenings of feature-length cartoons, quickly discovering Hanna-Barbera and falling in love with it.
Now would man trade tomorrow for a time long forgot time?
Now, while this piece of information may not seem important, I believe this was the very first building block that would lead to what would eventually become the most insane and influential cartoon ever made. After his father left the Air Force, the Kricfalusi family moved back to Canada, this time residing in Ottawa. One day, at an unspecified time, Michael decided to take John to a corner store after beating him. It's important to note that John's dad beats him like every single day. While browsing all the different trinkets in the store, John sees a long, tall box that says Huckleberry Hound on it. He's not sure what might be in the box, but he knows his favorite cartoon character is all over it, and that's more than enough for him. After begging and tugging on his father's shirt, his dad finally gives in and buys it for him. And after arriving home from the corner store, John was beaten by his dad again before heading into his room and opening up the box. Inside, he sees 100 different strips, all showing Huckleberry Hound in different poses, along with instructions that tell you to glue these strips to pieces of paper and then flip through them. After seeing this, John is perplexed and almost finds the whole situation to be crazy, but follows the rules anyway. After gluing all the pieces together, John follows the next step and flips through the papers, seeing the animation go flying. This sends John into a frenzy. He couldn't believe his eyes. All these years of concluding that animation was magic, only to figure out that it was science, sparked a new light in John. Learning that making cartoons was an attainable thing that humans could do motivated John in a way that never had before. Not long after this, John spends the majority of his first year back in Canada watching Hanna-Barbera cartoons and learning to draw them. Since this is a fairly conservative point in time, John's father finds this lasting interest in cartoons concerning and worries that they may be, quote, rotting his brain, so he beats him again. All through middle school, John's interest in animation only continues to get stronger as his father is now beating him twice a day, out of fear that John may be a homosexual. Michael's fear of his son being a homosexual would eventually lead to John coming home from school one day and heading to his room to read his hidden stash of comics as usual. However, it would seem that his dad found the hidden stash as all the comic books had been replaced with Playboys, likely in an attempt to set John on a straight path.
Yes, sir. There's nothing a man hates more than having
a gay son. As John gets into high school, he begins to develop schizophrenic delusions and a condition that causes his head to enlarge. This eventually resulted in schizophrenic episodes that caused John to do nothing but sit inside and draw all damn day, causing his father to somehow manage to beat the crap out of him even more. It's also important to note that besides her name, we literally know nothing about John's mother. Like, I think she's handicapped. Like, I literally think she's brain dead. She doesn't seem to do anything, so. But after John got out of high school, he decided to move to the good old homeland of America, where he studied animation in Wyoming at Sheridan College. During this time, John is still watching cartoons, along with occasionally running around the backyard and pretending he's a dinosaur, despite being in his 20s. He attends weekly screenings of old film and cartoons. Among them are the cartoons of Bob Clampett and Tex Avery, which seem to be very impressionable to Kricfalusi. causing his head to enlarge twice as big now, and his schizophrenic delusions to only get worse. His dad was really suspecting him of being a homosexual now. Kricfalusi would do nothing but obsess over and draw Bob Clampett cartoons all day. His father did consider beating him again at this time, but after John claimed that, quote, every night when he closed his eyes, he sees Bugs Bunny, he figured that was punishment enough. While attending Sheridan, John eventually meets Bob Camp, immediately becoming interested in his style and ability to paint. He also meets Lynn Naylor, who would later become his girlfriend. It's also important to mention that John's girlfriends will become very interesting in the story later. In late 1978, John preferred to party rather than go to class, which eventually led to him getting expelled. This didn't seem to bother him as far as his career was concerned though, as he later said in life, quote, nothing about animation do you learn in animation school. After being expelled, John decides to move to Los Angeles, California, likely in an attempt to find a job in animation and avoid another lashing from his dad. After moving to Los Angeles, John quickly meets his idol, Bob Clampett, who introduces Kricfalusi to Milt Gray. Clampett had suggested that Kricfalusi join Gray's classical animation class, which eventually led to Gray helping John facilitate a job at Filmation, finally getting his start on shows like Super Friends and the Tom and Jerry Comedy Show. The first cartoon that John worked on independently was a short by the name of Ted Bakes One in 1985, which was produced with Bill Ray and featured a chicken with an egg stuck in its colon, screaming until it got it out. From 1979 to the mid-1980s, John worked for Filmation, now becoming exceedingly bored of it, and going on later to say that this was, quote, the worst animation studio that ever existed, and the only entertainment you get there is this malnourished chihuahua in the corner saying, kill them all. John would later go on to find new jobs at Hanna-Barbera and Dick Entertainment. Despite working at one of his dream studios, John doesn't seem to look back on this time fondly, probably due to the fact that the condition enlarging his head was causing him immeasurable pain. However, at this time he did seem to enjoy his time as a layout artist on the 1985 revival of the Jetsons, as it allowed him to be able to train a team of Taiwanese animators to draw characters with more expression. After this, John's Lord and Savior, Ralph Bakshi, saved him from having to work on these, quote, insipid cartoons. John and Ralph had already met back in 1980 when Kricfalusi visited Bakshi Studios in hopes of getting a job working on the animated version of Lord of the Rings. Ralph turned him down, but did tell him to come back another time when they were working on something funny. When John returned to work for Ralph, he approached his office before being stopped in his tracks by the sounds of Ralph screaming like an ape down the hallway. After this, Bakshi walks out and looks at John right in the eyes, and needless to say, John is terrified. However, to John's surprise, Bakshi actually gives him a smile and a warm welcome. Bakshi later asked John to watch an animated short that his studio had been working on. After viewing the short, Ralph asked John what his thoughts were on the piece, to which Kricfalusi responded that it was, quote, the worst thing he had ever seen. This sent Ralph into a frenzy, spitting out his mouthful of sunflower seeds all over Kricfalusi's face and ripping all his clothes off before running down the hallway naked, yelling about how he's finally met someone who isn't a yes man. John began his work with Ralph Bakshi doing designs for the film Bobby's Girl, which was later sold to TriStar Pictures before getting canceled. In 1986, the Rolling Stones asked Bakshi Studios to make an animated music video for The Harlem Shuffle. Bakshi accepted and appointed Kricfalusi to be the director of animation, despite by this time already having to build an on-site psych ward due to John's constant nonsensical rants and rubbing fecal matter on the walls. They would eventually begin work on a new project by the name of Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures. This would end up being the team's most successful project yet, considering it was based on a classic Terry Toons character. John directed 8 out of 26 episodes and supervised the series, but left the show soon after. The production of Mighty Mouse was very different at the time. John's motivational talks, along with leaving altars around the studio to, quote, appease the gods, gave the cartoon more creative leeway. To appease his 3 gods, Tex Avery, Bob Clampett, and Ralph Bakshi, John decided that on Mighty Mouse he would give the animators more control and focus on each of their autistic strengths. John would later return to Mighty Mouse, but after going a little too far, John would do something that would ruin it for his whole team.